Hornet undergoes a dramatic transformation over the course of her journey in Silksong, from a solitary wanderer who is driven forward only by curiosity, into a daring hero who is surrounded by a community of friends and allies, and is willing to risk her life to protect them. In previous videos, I discussed how the themes of motherhood and faith are portrayed in Silksong, but Hornet's personal story is more about the themes of growth, rebirth, family, and community. At the beginning of the game, she is not really focused on helping the bugs of Pharloom. That is not a priority for her. In their first encounter, she says to the chapel maid down in Bone Bottom, quote, "Then I shall seek their citadel. If the veiled bugs would go to such lengths to bring me here, I intend to find out why." That's it. At first, she is just looking for information, to unravel the mystery. What does the Citadel want with her? Over time, her motivations begin to change. She learns the truth that this kingdom has been caught in the web of a higher being. Those veiled bugs who captured her were little more than slaves or mindless husks. She discovers that the Citadel is a place of suffering and oppression. She says to the caretaker of the shrine and Songclave, quote, "These poor bugs all are victims of the Citadel and its insidious attraction. This place draws them up into its maw only to consume them utterly." Here you can see her compassion beginning to emerge. However, that is still not her primary motivation. She is driven by something else, which is revealed by her next interaction with the caretaker. He asks her if she was brought from outside of Pharloom's borders, and she replies, quote, "You are correct, the one who waits atop this citadel. Through their hospitality I arrived in this kingdom. I seek now to return that welcome in kind." So at this point, it sounds like she wants revenge. She wants to destroy Grandmother Silk. And notice how the caretaker responds. He says, quote, "Beastly words them, finely spoken, but beastly all the same. I just pray you don't bring any more unneeded pain down on the heads of these gormless little pilgrims." He is the one who brings up the possibility that her actions may hurt the ordinary bugs caught in the middle of this conflict. And his choice of words here is really interesting. Beastly. That is exactly how Grandmother Silk is described in the opening text of the game. It reads, quote, "They see your beauty so frail and fine, they see your peace woven of faith and toil. They forget your heart bound in slumber and servitude. When you wake they shall see your truth, a beast's nature bare to all." This beastly nature is demonstrated by Grandmother Silk's domination of the land of Pharloom. The way she seeks absolute possession of the bugs of the Citadel, which you can see in her dialogue after acquiring the silk heart dropped by the unraveled boss fight. She says, quote, "Bind their shells, their voices, their song, to devote eternal, bind their souls, raise them up, one mind, one union, bind them all, their memory, they are ours, bound forever." By having the caretaker describe Hornet's motivations using that word, beastly, the developers are drawing a connection between Hornet and Grandmother Silk. Maybe, at least at this point in the story, deep down inside somewhere, they are not so different after all. The caretaker makes this comparison even more explicit later in the game when he says, quote, "So what are you hoping for, eh? Planning to usurp, to perch above us all as queen? Build up our hopes only to string us all in your own beastly web. Such is the way of weavers and gods both." Notably, Hornet does not have any response to this question. She neither affirms nor denies his suggestion. At least not yet. Later, at the beginning of the Silk and Soul questline, she admits the truth. He says, quote, "It's feeling almost time, eh, Bellringer? You and her who waits up there, that fated meeting won't hold forever. Ready to make your play, to oust one ruler and claim her place?" Hornet, quote, "I'll not deny some part of me desires that outcome. Dominance, it seems, is baked deep in my blood, as too, no doubt, for the one up top." Here she finally acknowledges that he was right all along, that she does share Grandmother Silk's basic nature, which I think is exactly what we see in the normal ending of the game. If you just follow the standard path and climb to the summit of the Citadel and defeat Grandmother Silk without completing the Silk and Soul questline, just look at what happens. Hornet binds Grandmother Silk in the exact same way that she bound all of those dead weavers earlier in the game. That is how she acquires new abilities. Except this time, instead of just getting a new skill, Hornet completely transforms. I love how the developers use changes in the on-screen interface here to demonstrate this transformation. It is a form of meta storytelling that is really only possible in a video game. A new crest is formed, far larger and more elaborate than any of the others. Hornet's silk spool is dramatically lengthened, far longer than it is possible to reach otherwise. Her ancient masks, which function as a health bar, take on a new appearance, very similar to the masks of the Weavers, perhaps suggesting that Hornet is finally embracing the Weaver side of her ancestry. In the final cutscene, a huge explosion sends thousands of silk threads to spread in all directions, and at the center is a new cocoon, inside which Hornet is shown to be undergoing the final stages of her transformation, growing several new limbs, becoming more spider-like. What is happening in this normal ending is exactly what the caretaker accused her of. Hornet has replaced Grandmother Silk, becoming the new queen of Pharloom. She has given in to her own worst inclinations, that beastly yearning for domination. Instead of breaking free, Pharloom has swapped one godlike despot for another. However, it does not have to end this way. If you complete the Silk and Soul questline, Hornet will reject that part of her nature. She will choose a different path to become Pharloom's savior instead of its queen. Let's take another look at that dialogue with the caretaker we examined earlier, where she says, quote, "I'll not deny some part of me desires that outcome." From there, the quote continues, "And yet another part resists, a part over time I find myself siding with more. That part wishes not to claim a monarch's mantle, rather it would see my freedom regained, and this kingdom's bugs unshackled from their pale chains." Caretaker, quote, "Remarkable idea you're speaking there, Bellringer. A world cut free. Not a wish I've had much cause to hope on, serious like, but I ain't so surprised to hear you speak it. For all your helpin', I've been seeing it clear. You've still got the monarch in you all right, and the glare of a weaver, but the ambition, that's wild different from both." The caretaker recognizes that Hornet has grown beyond her nature. She has been, in a way, reborn. She is no longer a higher being, no longer a monarch, not even a weaver, but something different, something new. And what is the cause of this rebirth? What has changed for her? Well, the answer to that question lies in the conditions for unlocking the Silk and Soul questline. Okay, so Silk and Soul is the name of an optional quest which can appear at the end of Act 2, which allows Hornet to trap Grandmother Silk without binding her, without absorbing the monarch's power. And how does the player unlock this questline? Well, you have to complete nearly every single side quest in the game. Just a quick summary. You have to rescue Sherma from the White Ward, which, as I discussed in my previous video analyzing his character, is what allows Sherma to undergo his own transformation, from a naive child driven forward by blind faith into an experienced leader of the next generation. I've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating here. I really think her relationship with Sherma plays a huge role in Hornet's character arc. Over the course of the story, you can really see the way she grows to first care about him, the way she worries for his safety, and then later on she grows to respect him. Despite his diminutive size, he turns out to possess a surprising well of strength and a willingness to learn. And I think he convinces her that the ordinary bugs of Pharloom are strong enough to stand on their own, to survive what comes after the fall of the Citadel without her, which is why she is free to depart in the end. Anyway, back to the Silk and Soul questline. You also have to participate in the funeral rites of Chakra's mentor, which is what allows Chakra to finally complete her own journey, to grow up and find new purpose in life, and this is something we will discuss in more detail later. You have to rescue all, or at least most, of the fleas and help them establish a new thriving colony in Fleetopia. You have to contribute to the rebuilding and strengthening of Bonebottom, Bellheart, and Songclave. You have to safeguard the halfway home from the Craw bugs. You have to provide assistance to a huge number of diverse bugs in every corner of the kingdom. What Hornet is doing through all this is building up strong and resilient communities throughout Pharloom. She is, without even realizing it, laying the foundations for a new society that can survive the destruction of the Citadel. In Act 3, thanks to her, Bellheart is under the protection of Chakra. The bugs of Songclave are being led by Sherma. The bugs of Bonebottom are able to escape its destruction. The fleas are safe in their new home. Gourmand and the Second Sentinel are helping out too. And even more important to our analysis of her character, Hornet is slowly, step by step, interaction after interaction, side quest after side quest. She is forging new connections, making new friends, and finding new allies. As I mentioned earlier, she begins this story completely alone, driven only by her personal curiosity. However, at one point she says to Pavo, quote, "I have seen the scale of suffering wrought across Pharloom, Pavo, and I will admit fulfilling these requests may do little to affect the cause. Even still, I find it a rewarding task. To aid another, the small warmth of it I had almost forgotten." She was alone in Hallownest for so long that she forgot what it felt like to be with others. The pleasure that can be found in community, rediscovering that spark, is the true catalyst of her metamorphosis. By the end of Act 3, she is no longer fighting for herself, but for her friends. And not just for them, but for Lace too, a bug who is very much not her friend. This is one of those key characteristics of true heroes in stories, the willingness to show compassion even to your most bitter enemy. And this is a relationship we need to discuss in more detail because these two characters are foils to each other. But before we do that, let's rewind a little bit. Let's talk about how Hornet was portrayed back in Hollow Knight, because in many ways, her character arc in this game involves rejecting the role she had in the previous game's story. As she says to Lace down in the Abyss, quote, "I have already stood sentinel for one dying land. That role I will never play again. While I live and possess the strength to resist, this kingdom and the bugs within it shall not fall." At the beginning of Hollow Knight's story, she does not make any attempt to change the fate of Hallownest. In fact, she actually fights to do the opposite. That entire kingdom was trapped in a kind of eternal stasis, unchanging forever, and she was frozen along with it, until the knight arrived and brought change with him. The same way Hornet brings change to Pharloom. It is as if she learned from his example. Okay, so Hornet appears more or less about 5 or 6 times in Hollow Knight, and we are going to examine each of those appearances. The first occurs early in the game in the Green Path. She appears as a solitary and mysterious figure, zipping through the overgrown caverns, always just out of reach until the first confrontation. In this clearing, she challenges the knight to a battle, saying, quote, "Come no closer, ghost. I've seen you creeping through the undergrowth, stalking me. This old kingdom, a terrible thing awakens. I can smell it in the air. I know what you are. I know what you tried to do, and I cannot allow it." So at first, she is actually fighting for the status quo, trying to prevent the knight from breaking the seals on the black egg, which contains the essence of the radiance. However, when he proves himself stronger than she expected, she retreats. In her second appearance in the City of Tears, she is no longer hostile. Instead, she takes on the role of a guide, telling the knight where to go next. She says, quote, "If knowing that truth, you'd still attempt a role in Hallownest's perpetuation, seek the graven ash and the mark it would grant to one like you." Let's examine her speaking style here. It is very unique. Most of the characters in Hollow Knight speak in an ordinary conversational sort of style, whereas Hornet's dialogue is much more cryptic and antique and even a bit pretentious. She uses a lot of unusual vocabulary, for example, perpetuation. It makes her sound very old, the resident of some distant age, which of course she is. I'm pretty sure Hornet is like hundreds of years old. This might sound like a ridiculous comparison, but she always reminded me of Kingseeker Frompt in Dark Souls, who is another character who spoke in a sort of archaic and grand style, who was very, very old, had lived during the kingdom's golden age and witnessed its slow collapse, and who served as a guide to the player, offered advice on how to restore the kingdom. However, Frompt was a character who only ever desired to keep the same cycle going forever and ever and ever, whereas Hornet eventually becomes convinced that, with the knight's strength, it is possible to break free. Anyway, this speaking style sets her apart from every other character in the game. Even back then, she was portrayed as totally alone, never shown interacting with any other character besides the knight. Notably, I think her dialogue has changed a bit in Silksong. I think she's written to be a bit more casual in this game. Moving on, if the knight follows her guidance, she tests his strength once again before the corpse of the worm in the kingdom's edge. She will not allow him to progress unless he proves that he is powerful enough to overcome the radiance. And she is no longer just a sentinel standing on the sidelines and silently observing events from afar. She has become a character of action, leaping in to save the knight before he is crushed by the cavern's collapse. It's interesting. Hornet in the sequel is so defined by her willingness to act. She rushes headlong into danger. She always chooses to fight. She refuses to just sit around and accept her fate. And yet, this defining characteristic is really only a recent development. She spent centuries back in Hallownest as essentially a completely passive character. It was the knight who showed her it was possible to fight back. In her fourth appearance at the entrance to the abyss, she says, quote, "Ghost, I see you face the place of your birth and now drape yourself in the substance of its shadow. Though our strength is born of similar source, that part of you, that crucial emptiness, I do not share. Funny then that such darkness gives me hope. Within it, I see the chance of change. A difficult journey you would face, but a choice it can create. Prolong our world's stasis or face the heart of its infection. I would urge you to take that harder path, but what end may come, the decision rests with you." Her motivations have completely transformed. Instead of trying to block the knight's interference, she is now urging him to take charge. And then later, if you dream nail her in the distant village after the death of Hera, she says, quote, "Mother, forgive my inaction, but another path may be possible." This is a very important moment for her character. She chose to stand by and allow her own mother to die for the possibility of a new path. Of course, as Hera states in her own dialogue, she is very willing to sacrifice herself for her daughter's sake. It is definitely interesting that Hera is also described as a beast, yet she does not seem to be inflicted with the same longing for dominance that defines Grandmother Silk. Perhaps, just like Hornet, she was able to repress that part of her nature, chooses the needs of her community and family over her own personal desire for power. In this way, Hornet is really just following in her mother's footsteps. In her final appearance in the final battle, Hornet risks her own life to join the knight inside the Black Egg, to end the threat of the Radiance once and for all. So you can see in Hollow Knight, Hornet underwent a full character arc, from a passive to an active protagonist. Her journey in Silksong is really just a fulfillment of the character development she has already undergone. Except she still has a lot of growing up left to do. In some ways, she is still a child at the beginning of the sequel. And this is where I want to bring in the comparison to Lace. As I said before, I believe these two characters are meant to be foils to each other. They are both the children of a higher being. They are both deeply cherished by their mothers but also abandoned, left to fend for themselves in a dangerous and broken world. In Hornet's case, her mother entered the dream world to seal away the Radiance, and then Hallownest fell to the infection anyway, leaving Hornet all alone. In Lace's case, her mother has been sealed inside the cocoon for probably her entire life, while the Citadel has fallen to the haunting, again leaving her alone. And they were both created to fulfill a certain wish of their mother. Grandmother Silk desired a loyal child, someone to replace the disloyal Weavers, while Hera seems to have just wanted any child at all and was content with any form that offspring took. At the start of their respective stories, Hornet and Lace have both been trapped in a form of stasis for a very long time. They are some of the last survivors of a dead kingdom, solitary sentinels watching over the ruins. In this dialogue, the caretaker says that Lace probably saw herself as the Citadel's protector, and that is exactly the same role that Hornet adopted back in Hallownest. But the precise manner in which these two characters responded to their respective isolation was very different. To manage her loneliness, Hornet seems to have become cold and stoic, retreating within herself and her role of defender. In the journal entry for the Great Conchfly, Hornet mentions that she once tried to form relationships with other bugs, but she outlived them all. In the end, whenever her latest partner died, she was always left alone again, and eventually she stopped trying. She accepted her isolation. On the other hand, Lace seems to have been driven mad by her loneliness. She is a character defined by her anger. She is willing to destroy all of Pharloom and everyone in it in order to hurt her mother, the person she holds responsible for all of her own suffering. Down in the abyss, she says, quote, "Letting you live was my rebellion, Spider. I've denied my mother your silken strength. I've won. She can thrash and waste and know her pathetic, broken child caused the mortal wound." Rejoice and let it all come down. This is something I have discussed in detail in other videos, but the best antagonists always represent some fatal flaw in the protagonist which has the potential to destroy them. For example, back in God of War 4, the character of Baldur has a lot of the same feelings of anger and betrayal and hurt that once defined the protagonist Kratos when he was younger. And so, when he defeats Baldur at the end of the game, he is thematically overcoming those worst parts of himself. I think something similar is happening here in Silksong, except the big difference is that both Hornet and Lace survive this story. They leave Pharloom together, and why is that? Where are they going? To answer that question, let's examine two more sets of dialogue. First, this interaction between Hornet and the Mask Maker. Hornet says, quote, "You have the sight, Maker. Tell me what you see in me." Maker, quote, "Your mask, it reads clear enough, old one. Watcher, hunter, monarch even, though you may reject that station. A complex visage, perhaps, yet still to my sight it looks unresolved." Okay, so apparently the Mask Maker has the ability to see a bug's true nature, which makes sense. They craft masks to correctly reflect the personality of the bug they are crafting for. The Mask Maker says that Hornet's nature is unresolved, meaning her identity is not yet settled. She has not yet reached her final form. She does not really know who she is or who she wants to become. Now Hornet actually disagrees with him. She replies, quote, "If you see a transitional state, it is one I have accepted. My mask has remained defined through lifetimes uncounted." Here she is saying basically, dude, I am old as dirt. I have lived countless lifetimes. What you see now is what I have been for a very long time, and I don't think I'm changing anytime soon. But the Mask Maker insists, saying, quote, "I, rigid I'm sure, but your kind rarely develop evenly. And the lifetime of bugs are poor measure for one like you. Could be there's more growth awaiting you yet." And in Chakra's character arc, we see an example of the kind of growing up that Hornet still needs to undergo. I think it is notable that Chakra initially misidentifies Hornet as a child. At their first meeting, she says, quote, "Poshanka, edges sharp and senses keen. In my land, that is the way warriors greet each other. For though you are a child barely hatched, you are also a warrior. Your stance, your weapon, your movements all proclaim it so." Even after Hornet insists that, no, I really am a grown-up, Chakra continues to address her by the title Child-Wielding Needle for most of the game. It is not until the end of Chakra's questline that she finally addresses her by her name, saying, quote, "Poshanka, Hornet-Wielding Needle, for that is your name, is it not? I have heard it spoken in this land with reverence. I had hoped you would accept my summons. In these moments, one is good, but two is best." It is only after Hornet has completed all of those other side quests we discussed earlier that Chakra acknowledges her adulthood, a signal of her growth. But there's more going on here. Okay, so Chakra spends the whole story searching for her lost mentor, someone who was like a mother to her. When she finally finds her, the mentor is already dead, and Hornet participates in the funeral ceremony. Afterwards, Hornet asks, quote, "Your master has been found, Chakra. Your task in these lands is finished. Will you now return to your tribe?" Chakra, quote, "I shall not return, Hornet-Wielding Needle. I cannot. To leave my tribe's nest plains, that journey has only one direction. This has always been our way, our long leaving. For those few who survive till age seeks to claim their shell, and those fewer who choose to send them on. But these lands, Pharloom, my nest plains I once saw so grand, now they become small, a place for birth and growing, but a place too narrow to live a bug's life full." It is a very common trope in coming-of-age stories that a child must leave home in order to truly grow up. And I think that is something Chakra is realizing here, and perhaps why her master departed on this journey in the first place, to draw Chakra out of her childhood home, so that her mentee could face new challenges in a distant land, so that she could reach her full potential. Hornet, as she said herself in that previous dialogue, has been stuck in a transitional state for a very long time. As long as she stayed in the familiar and comfortable setting of Hallownest, she would remain in a phase of arrested development. Ironically, by kidnapping her and dragging her to Pharloom, Grandmother Silk did Hornet a huge favor. And that is also why Hornet has to leave at the end of the story. You know, why doesn't she just stay here with all the new friends she has made and help them rebuild? And the answer is because she has grown as much as she possibly can here. In order to keep developing, she has to go out and face new challenges. And so does Lace, who has been trapped in her own form of arrested development here in Pharloom. That is why they have to leave together. Before I end this video, there is one final theme in Hornet's storyline that we need to discuss, and that is the theme of family. Hornet does not accomplish anything in the story on her own. For example, I already mentioned that Hornet acquires most of her new abilities by binding the shells of the Weavers. Well, all of those Weavers are her distant relatives, members of her family tree. They address her as, quote, daughter of a distant land. We who remained have waited long. Bind our strength to yours. Reclaim the future of our haunted kingdom. They willingly join their strength to hers. It is only through them that she gains the power to challenge Grandmother Silk. In a previous video, I dissected this dream sequence in detail, in which she has interactions with all three of her maternal figures. It is thanks to her mother that she acquires the power to resist the black void of the abyss. At the very end of the game, she is only able to escape that abyss when she is rescued by the Knight, who is her sibling. And of course, she and Lace are related to each other as well, both descending from Grandmother Silk, who ultimately sacrifices herself to give her daughter a chance to escape. Again and again and again, it is the power of family that saves the day. The same thing happened at the end of Hollow Knight. The Knight was only able to overcome the Radiance by merging his strength with that of his siblings, which is also what allows them to finally rest in peace. Hornet's story in Silksong is all about the connections she forges with other characters. And in Team Cherry's portrayal, there is no stronger bond than the one between family. That is the end of my analysis of Hornet's character. I was going to skip doing one of these on Lace because we already talked about her a lot back in the Grandmother Silk video, but now I think she probably deserves her own full analysis, right? So next time we are going to take a closer look at the mad creature of silk herself, who is driven by rage, loneliness, and a fear of rejection to nearly destroy the entire kingdom of Pharloom, but who is saved at the last moment by a simple act of kindness. Okay, after finishing this video, I'm adding this short postscript to the end because I feel like this analysis is missing something. It is worth mentioning that Hornet is a very different kind of playable character from the Knight. He was a more traditional silent video game protagonist, a truly blank slate, literally written to be empty. In some ways, that makes him a much easier character to work with from a writing perspective. He does not have a real backstory or personality or even personal goals. You know, not in the traditional sense. The Knight was our avatar. Most of Hollow Knight's story occurred in the distant past. As players, we were exploring the ruins, slowly uncovering that ancient narrative piece by piece. And there was comparatively less happening in the present. Going into Silksong, I was very curious to see how Team Cherry would handle a far more talkative playable character. One with a very distinct personality and motivations and past. That requires a very different kind of narrative, one that is taking place primarily in the now. To be truly compelling, she has to face some kind of personal crisis and grow and change in response. But man, they nailed it. The crisis she overcomes is not Grandmother Silk or the collapse of the Citadel. The true conflict, the one that matters, is internal. It is rejecting that beastly part of her nature. I was reading an interview where the developers stated that they designed the world of Pharloom around Hornet's character. Everything started with her, not just her unique traversal mechanics, but her personality. This is a setting designed to draw out her strengths, a place where she can explore the things that matter most to her. Her family and her past, where she can learn who she really is. Usually, fantasy writers do the opposite. They start with the world and then they populate it with characters after the fact. Something else I didn't really discuss is how funny Hornet is at times. Like all of these brutal slap animations when she gets fed up with the irritating behavior of some other character, or all the space she dedicates in her journal to writing about how much she appreciates the fluffier creatures of Pharloom, or the way she gets so offended at getting kidnapped by the flies that she condemns their entire race. This is a lady who does not like being put in a cage. I've seen a lot of fans say that they prefer the story of Hollow Knight, and that is just totally baffling to me because my feelings are the exact opposite. As much as I loved Hallownest, Pharloom feels so much more detailed and grand and lived in, and the way every single region of the map directly connects to the Citadel, living underneath its oppressive, corrupting shadow. And then the Citadel itself is filled with all these fascinating little distinct subcultures, from the pathetic flies of the slab to the obsessive serpentine vault keepers. It is masterclass world building. Hallownest feels much more spread out and disconnected to me. I've always wanted to do world building videos where I take a game like Silksong or Elden Ring and we just go area by area and really take our time and slow down and note all the little visual details and how each unique culture is being crafted by the developers and the individual backstory of each region of a fictional world and how they connect with each other. Anyway, I'm rambling. Next time we will look at Lace, and that should be really interesting too, because Lace and Hornet's relationship in Silksong is a mirror to the Knight and Hornet's relationship in Hollow Knight. Except, what if Hornet had completely lost her mind, became this element of chaos and destruction, trying to tear Hallownest to the ground? But I'll save the rest of that discussion for the next video. See you then.